we can slowly get started. Welcome everyone to our webinar, How to Leverage Baseline GHG Emissions for Company Buy-in on Climate Action. So we know that corporate climate action is super important in order to meet our UN SDG goals and corporate climate goals as well. And so through this webinar, you will be learning how to estimate your baseline greenhouse gas emissions using any budget, how to leverage emissions data to get buy-in from key decision makers, and how to use your results to really identify the most impactful reduction strategies at any scale. So for our webinar today, we'll be featuring myself and Sarah, so we'll do some quick intros. Hi, I'm Julia. I'm an associate director at OnePointFive. We are a climate advisory firm. I've been here for almost 3 years now, and I help lead our various GHG accounting projects, and I also teach on GHG accounting through our OPF Academy course. And I will pass it to Sarah. Well.
Thanks, Julia. Hey, everybody. My name is Sarah Shoemaker. I'm a program manager at the Change Climate Project and very excited to be joining with Julia today. I manage our measurement programs at the Change Climate Project and also lead our volunteer carbon management team. Excited to talk about more about what we do and everything today. So I'll pass it back to Julia.
Great. So this is our agenda for today. So first, I'll talk through what GHG accounting unlocks and how we should really be using the results and the outputs. Then I'll pass it to Sarah, who will run through the B tool and how you actually get to a baseline GHG emissions measurement using the tool, and we'll get to see a demo of it as well, which is super exciting. We'll pause for some Q&A, and then we'll move on to how to actually build a carbon reduction action plan. We'll feature some case studies from both Sarah's side and my side on how we leverage GHG emissions data to get buy-in from company decision makers. And I'll also talk through some common hurdles that we've heard from our OPF Academy fellows and others on struggles they face in getting corporate buy-in and how we can overcome those. So before we dive into the content, we will be using Slido today for a poll and for any Q&A that might come up throughout the session. So I'll pause here and ask for anyone attending to either go to slido.com on whatever device you're using and type in that number. You can also hit the QR code and access Slido that way. So I'll just pause here for 30 seconds. And thank you, Denise, for also sharing the link to Slido in the chat if that is easier for you. Okay, so with Slido up and running, we do have a poll question to get us warmed up today. So given the theme of our webinar, would love to know from your standpoint, which of the following pain points have you faced in the past, in your prior work or your current work, trying to progress climate within your organization, or perhaps an organization that you've worked for externally? Right, we have one response in, very exciting. Okay, so far we have difficulty getting buy-in from management. We have competing priorities and bandwidth limitations to take on additional climate projects. Lack of budget allocated to sustainability projects. Okay, definitely seeing some coalescing. I can totally understand these, and I think I have felt them in my prior work, also as a consultant working with customers. These are definitely very real constraints that they face. So let's move on to how we should be using GHG accounting. And before I start, a quick overview of OnePointFive and what we do and what we're here for. So our mission is helping organizations unlock sustainable growth through intentional climate solutions developed by vetted climate experts. So as I mentioned, we do have a consulting arm, and we also teach through our OnePointFive Academy course. And we're really hoping to upskill the workforce, upskill our clients, and make sure that everyone has access to the sustainability knowledge that they need and really feels empowered to do this work. And so what does GHG accounting unlock? I think a lot of times it's viewed as a compliance exercise or an onerous accounting exercise, but it is a really powerful tool. And so this list is not exhaustive. However, GHG accounting does allow you to identify hotspots across your entire value chain. So this could be upstream with your suppliers and also downstream with your customers. It lets you pinpoint those areas where you should really focus your reduction efforts, because really we want to be targeting high impact actions, knowing we cannot boil the ocean and implement changes across all aspects of an organization all at once. You really have to prioritize certain actions and move forward on those. It allows you to understand your baseline level of emissions. That way you can set reduction targets. And ideally, these are aligned with globally approved criteria such as SBTI. It allows you to invest in carbon projects to compensate any residual emissions that you are not able to reduce. You can also share all the work that you've done with internal and external stakeholders, and this includes not only your employees, but also your customers, investors. And of course, we know that sustainability regulations and regulatory requirements are coming, so it does allow you to report to regulators where required by law. And right here, we have the end-to-end GHG calculation process. Now, we at OnePointFive, we follow the GHG protocol. It is a globally approved and followed standard for GHG accounting. And we've essentially broken it down into 5 major steps, so with some key activities under each one. So first, you'll start by identifying your emission sources. So within the corporate GHG inventory, what are all the possible emission sources? We then categorize them into scopes 1, 2, and 3. And really the goal here is to identify and determine what are the most material and relevant sources for a given organization to really help focus data collection and measurement. Then we move on to the actual data collection. We determine what is actually available for each emission source, how granular of data does the organization already collect. We identify the inputs that we need and start collecting data. We then make sure to find quality emissions factors for each emission source. So if you're using an automated tool or platform, it does this for you, which is fantastic. Then you calculate emissions by multiplying your data with those emissions factors that we found. Of course, along the way, you want to be documenting any methodologies, assumptions, and limitations that were used. And we summarize our outputs in a GHG inventory. We then are able to report and take action. So as I mentioned in the last slide, we can be reporting internally and or externally, and most importantly, taking action, which is identifying those next steps. What are the emissions reduction initiatives that will really make an impact, and how do we prioritize those and put them into fruition? Now, with this process, we do have some best practice principles that we recommend following. And this is really to highlight the fact that this process is not meant to be an onerous one where everyone who does it gets bogged down in the details and the data and doesn't really progress onward. The goal is that GHG accounting is a means to identifying those carbon reduction initiatives. So some best practice do's are that you should apply an internationally recognized standard like the GHG protocol for consistency. You should identify the most significant sources of emissions to really help streamline data collection and to be able to concentrate on those areas that have high impact potential. You want to align any GHG reduction targets with business strategy upfront, and also try to weave in GHG accounting into business as usual processes. You want to use digital tools that are out there and platforms to really automate data collection and analysis and reduce the manual efforts and time required by employees to get this data. And of course, you should, if you have done GHG accounting, you should definitely be sharing your results with stakeholders, because that will really help build momentum for reduction projects. Now, a few don'ts. We don't recommend expending significant amount of resources upfront to try and collect granular scope 3 data for each and every single emission source. It's just not feasible or realistic. And with the GHG protocol, it does allow you to get more granular, get more accurate over time. And what we recommend is focusing on those material categories, getting an estimate, and then you'll know where you need to investigate, or perhaps where you need to collect more accurate data going forward. With that, we don't recommend striving for perfect data accuracy at the expense of timely action. Yes, accuracy is important, but we also want to use this as a means to identify what we need to do after we complete GHG accounting. So where possible, you can use reasonable estimates to help keep the process moving. Of course, we do not want to treat GHG accounting as the end goal. We rather use it as a tool to then act on carbon reduction opportunities. And definitely do not avoid or overlook the importance of quick wins, because they do help demonstrate progress. And oftentimes, quick wins are a great way to get started on GHG accounting, be able to see the results of your hard work and show progress, and then identify those longer term initiatives going forward. And so I will pass it to Sarah, who is part of Change Climate Project. They are a nonprofit partner of ours, and I really feel that they bring these principles to life through their platform and the work that they do.
I'll mute there.
Yeah.
Thanks, Julia. Yeah, as Julia mentioned, I am from the Change Climate Project and have a bit of an intro on our organization in the next slide, but excited to show you all our tools today, which OPF works with us closely on using them in their academy and all that good stuff. So we'll get into it in the next few minutes here, but we can go back one slide. For a bit of context on our organization, we are a nonprofit on a mission to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions. And we do this by motivating companies and consumers on climate action by providing our action-oriented tools at low or no cost to consumer brands to help remove those barriers to entry on climate action. And we do this in really two ways, which is our programs, which are broken out into our certification label and our tools. Today, we're mainly going to focus on tools, but a bit about our climate neutral certification label. We do offer this as a transparent, rigorous, and backed by an explicit standard to help companies account for, measure, and plan their impact and actionable change. Our standard is available on our website if you're interested in learning more, but it is publicly available, needs to be renewed every year by our certifying brand community, and requires data to be hosted publicly on brand's profile page so that everyone who is achieving the certification is held to their claims and held to that rigorous standard. Our tools are really built to enable that work, but have kind of grown beyond that to enable high integrity climate action at an accessible way to any company who's looking to measure their emissions impact and drive change. Our tools are meant to be easy to use. They're inexpensive, especially compared to other high-cost software on the market. They're methodologically documented. You can find a full documentation on our site as well, and are really great for bringing all types of employees into climate work, regardless of their training or company specialty. In short, you don't need to be a sustainability manager to measure your emissions or start planning reductions. Baked into both of these offerings, of course, is the importance of retaining our nonprofit model. And through this, we direct the most energy and money towards reducing emissions and increasing impact and access to this important reduction work rather than building high-cost software. Next slide, please. So today, again, we're going to focus mainly on our carbon management tools, which are centralized in the Business Emissions Evaluator, which we fondly refer to as the B. This tool is ever evolving, and we add new feature requests for our users. So it's really user built, but it's become the leading nonprofit carbon management platform on the market. It has lots of data visuals for brands to help identify emissions hotspots, which we're going to get into a bit deeper in a second. And for certifying brands, we have additional tooling for creating reduction goals and identifying carbon credits that they're able to compensate for their emissions with. The estimation portion is free for anyone to use, and our certification-specific tools are currently used by hundreds of certifying brands in our community. Next slide. So to talk a little bit more about how the tool works for carbon measurement is really in two steps, our estimation and then refinement. And estimation is what we would call a top-down approach for measuring a carbon footprint. You enter high-level spending data about your company operations, and the output of that tool is a cradle-to-customer carbon inventory that's estimated for you. This takes pretty little time to complete, around 15 to 30 minutes, depending on maybe the size of your operation, and is really good for small businesses, rough budgeting on your emissions total or magnitude of your emissions, and identifying hotspots, and really just getting started today. And again, it's at no cost to estimate your cradle to customer carbon inventory in a really short amount of time. The second step is refinement, and this we call a bottom-up approach to measurement. It allows the user to kind of correct that model and input real operational data that they might be able to collect from their business. We apply emission factors from external reputable databases called EcoInvent and Axiobase to convert, operational data inputs into emissions totals. This refinement exercise is available at a license offering for $2,500, which again is pretty much on the low end of cost for a full carbon management tool. And this allows users who are looking for more detailed analysis to get that from a carbon inventory and have additional tools for target setting and reporting at a more granular level. In either case, though, the tool provides a full estimation of a complete cradle to customer inventory, which is inclusive of greenhouse gas scopes 1, 2, and scope 3 categories 1 through 7 and 9. So really like a holistic view at emissions for a company who is providing products or service from origination to end customer. Cool. Next slide, please. So a little bit more about what this estimation step looks like, which we are going to demo today. But to lay it out for you, the inputs to this estimation model, which is called an economic input-output model, are at a high level operating costs, industry or what type of product or service a company might offer, and then their facilities and location. On the back end of this model, we have an idea based on macroeconomic data how industries tend to spend money across other industries. And so we take these inputs, and the output of the model is spend-based estimates that are flowed out across greenhouse gas scopes and categories. So from here, essentially what a user gets is, that full spend-based carbon inventory for all the scopes and categories of the B measures. This is a widely accepted modeling method in carbon measurement and refinement, but we know that this is an estimate, not necessarily for precise emissions, which is why we do have those options for refinement. Next slide, we will show just a quick preview before we dive into our demo of an output of an emissions estimate. Allows the user to, again, get this insight into the magnitude of their company emissions. Are you in the, couple hundreds of tons of carbon equivalent, or are you in the magnitude of, say, 20,000? And it really gets you an idea to baseline your emissions against others in your industry and understand where you are in your carbon inventory. We also have a breakdown in the estimate by scope 1, 2, and 3. So this allows the user to identify those emissions hotspots, whether they have, maybe the bulk of their emissions in scope 3 versus scope 1 or 2, and be able to start thinking about where to begin planning reductions or where they can drive the most impact with their reduction planning. Next slide. For refinement users, they are able to do deeper analysis to start with a pre-populated inventory, and then allows them to add additional operational data so that they can identify more granularly those top emissions contributors, or really the sources of emissions at a more precise level. This is really great because it gives the user a bit more insight and more information to make better or strategize reduction plans rather than just relying on an estimate. And so in either case, again, whether a user takes the estimation or refinement approach in the B, they'll be able to identify the main drivers behind their company footprint and really understand the levers that they can use to help them reduce their footprint to achieve long-term reduction goals. So really identifying what are the sources of emissions that they can target for those reductions. Lots of previews on the last slide, but I'm going to share my screen and do a brief B demo to show you what estimation looks like, and then also touch a little bit on what refinement looks like. We could spend a whole hour plus talking just about the V, but so this will just be a quick intro. So let me get my screen shared here. All right. And Denise, if you wouldn't mind dropping the B link in the chat, just so anyone has it, if you're curious about learning more about the B or signing up for your own account, again, the estimation is free. So you can use that link to play around with it if you'd like after this call. What that will look like if you make an account is you will get logged in here, and then we have the measure tools available. You'll be able to jump straight into beginning an estimate. And what you'll need to complete that is if you're, a company, you can model your own, make one up, or use, your own company to create an estimate here of your emissions. Today, I'm going to model out our demo company Intent. We make tents and hiking boots and operate in the US and China. So just to keep in mind for context when I go through this process here. Today, I'm going to need my company operating costs or the total spend in the emissions year, information about my facilities, and then what type of product or service I provide. So let's get started here. Again, first question is going to be operating costs. This is inclusive of cost of goods sold, salaries, really anything that a company spent to conduct their operations. For Intent today, I'm going to say we had an operating cost in 2023, our measurement year, of $30 million. Next, we get to list out our facilities that we operate in for Intent, and we bucket these into 4 main categories, which is offices, factories, warehouses, and retail stores. And we ask for a name of each location. So I'm going to say our HQ office for Intent is located in the United States, and this asked by country. And then we ask this question about control. We default to the definition of operational control, which we referenced from the greenhouse gas protocol. It's really, are we able to enact change at this facility? Do we pay the employees that go to work here? Do we pay the utility bills? For offices, this is almost always yes, so we default to controlled for office facilities. Under factories, for Intent, we'll list our 2 factory locations. This should be really any of our tier 1 suppliers if we're a company that's making products. So again, we had our tent factory, and this we'll say is located in China. This is a partner manufacturer, so we're going to list this as uncontrolled facility. And then our second factory is, let's say, our boot manufacturer facility or boot factory. We will say that our hiking boots are made in the United States for Intent, but we're also going to select uncontrolled for this specific facility. Okay, next we get to list our warehouses. If we do have any warehouses, I should have also mentioned for service-based companies, this still also certainly works. For something like an organization like OPF or the Change Climate Project, we are mostly on our computers every day. We're not making products, so we might stop at offices, and that's okay. But for companies who are using the B, might be consumer brands making products, then they would likely have lots of other facilities to list here. So for warehouses, for Intent, we might have a third-party logistics partner who does our warehousing and shipping. We'll say this is also located in the United States, but again, an uncontrolled facility since they kind of are, 3PL owns and operates this warehouse. All right, last one here is retail stores, and we'll say Sarah Sandals is, has one retail location. So we'll list that here. Also in the United States. This facility, our employees go to work here. We pay the utility bills, so we're going to list this as controlled. All right, so we've got our 4 main buckets, and then our next step here is to tell a bit more about what we do at these facilities. And first is splitting up % share of production based on spending on raw materials and manufacturing. We're going to say we're at a 60-40 split between our tent and boot manufacturer, just based on mostly spend alone. And then secondly, this is a key kind of step here is listing out the product type or service type that we provide, or what the type of products that we're making at these factories. At our tent factory, we will select plastic products, which includes nylon. Lots of tents are made from like polyester or nylon products. And that's 100% of our production that's happening at our tent factory. At our boot factory, we are making leather hiking boots. So we're going to look for leather and leather products, which include shoes, pants, handbags, and luggage. You notice this is a long list, but it's really descriptive of economic industries. So we're kind of picking high level industry or product types here. Again, this % share is going to be 100% of our production at our boot manufacturer. And then we are on to our calculating our emissions, again, based on those high level inputs, running these through those economic input output model. And what we will get in a second here is spend-based estimates that we then apply emission factors to convert spending into tons of carbon equivalent. So here for intent, based on those inputs, our company size, location, and the types of products that we make, we're at around 24,000 tons of CO2. And then when we scroll down here, we have that breakdown by scope 1, 2, and 3, and a reference of our list of facilities and control. So again, this is our jumping off point to get the conversation started with our stakeholders, with our company around, where do we stand and what should we start looking at to identify the levers to start reducing emissions. For most companies that make products, scope 3 is going to be the bulk of emissions, so certainly an area to target. But scope 1 and 2 is obviously very important and more within operational control for most companies as well. From here, if somebody wanted to take this a step further and purchase a refinement license, they certainly could. And to begin refinement, we would generate a more detailed kind of refinement experience with them. We host refinement in Google synced workbooks that kind of sync to the B, and this gives you, in a second, once this starts loading, a deeper breakdown by scope 1, 2, and 3, where a user can really identify top contributors in their emissions. Again, this is all going to be based on an estimate, but in a workbook, a user has the ability to begin entering real operational data into each scope and category for refinement. Again, we could talk about this all in a whole nother session. And if you're interested in learning more how to use the OPS Academy, does integrate this into their lessons. So great way to learn more, or come over to Change Climate, do a volunteer experiment, and we kind of do more training on the B as well. The last piece I want to point out here, which we gave a preview in slides, but for refinement users, we have kind of more detailed data visuals available once you enter in real operational data and get to a refined estimate of your emissions. You'd be able to better identify top contributors, really those like key sources of emissions that are driving your footprint, and emissions breakdown. And here we'd be able to see year-over-year emissions if we're using the B to measure each year. And then just additional data around top contributors by facility, just really more granular way to start identifying key levers to begin your reduction planning. All right, and I think I've taken plenty of time with this V demo. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I think we're going to pause for questions for a couple minutes. Let me just get my...
Let's see what the questions. I think we have one question, Sarah, where someone wants to understand the concept of a controlled facility, what that means.
Yeah, so the two main questions we ask around controlled facilities to help identify or user identify whether or not they control a facility is, do your company employees go to work there? And do you pay the utility bills at this facility, either directly through a utility provider or through a landlord? So you could imagine an office location, you'd likely answer yes to both of those. Your employees are going to work there day to day. And really, you have the ability to enact change. It's under your company control. For a facility like a contracted manufacturer in China, that's an entire business entity that you might be partnering with to make finished goods as a company, but you don't own and operate that facility. So it's not under your control.
All right. I think that is the one question we have thus far. We will have some time at the end if any more come up throughout. So perhaps we can progress forward. So we'll now move on to talking about reduction action plans. So take it away, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, we want to talk about a little bit how to tie your measurement in the B or whatever platform or way that you might be measuring your carbon emissions, and how to take that forward into identifying reduction action plans and setting science-aligned targets. Science-aligned targets are reduction targets that are in line with limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. We know this is the target that we need to meet to keep global warming in check. To meet this target, global emissions must be cut in half by 2030 and then hit net zero by 2050. So that's really what we as a global community are tracking towards. Targets are quantitative goals to decarbonize, and they can be set on either short or long-term timelines. But there might be questions about how does a company achieve these targets? And then on the next slide, we at the Change Climate Project suggest and kind of enable companies to do this by setting reduction action plans. And these are short-term actions meant to be set for or set a company up for success to achieve long-term goals. So those kind of longer-term 2030, 2050 timelines, you need bite-sized steps to be able to work towards those effectively. So reduction action plans are what those bite-sized changes are that can be made across a company, a product, operations, supply chains, and they add up to significantly reduce emissions over time. So whether or not a company has a target set, they should consider how to cut emissions by around 8 to 16% over the next 12 to 24 months to reduce emissions in line with climate science. How to set good reduction action plans. There's a couple of key ways to do this, and we advise using SMART goal setting. Plans should be specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and time-based. So an example of what this might look like is on the slide here, transitioning 50% of our air freight to ocean freight across Japanese green tea suppliers. This reduction action has a specific and measurable metric, 50% of our air freight to ocean freight. It's time bound with a completion date of Q3 2023, which has already passed. But for the sake of this example, it's also actionable. It has an owner identified, and it's relevant to a key source of emissions for this company, which is scope 3.4 upstream shipping. So all of that's included here. And this is, how companies who are going through climate neutral certification are advised to set their reduction action plans to meet those requirements. Next, we'll show you what this looks like in practice, but this slide kind of gives a visual of over time how short-term reduction action plans become the building blocks for a company's long-term climate strategy and help companies achieve those ambitious climate goals for near-term, 50% reduction, and then those net zero targets. Our next two slides include a couple of examples of what this kind of looks like end to end for a company. This first example or case study is a small dog food brand who has gone through our certification and used the B to estimate their emissions and then set reduction action plans based on that estimate. So they have their emissions total, scope 1, 2, and 3, and a couple examples of their near-term reduction action plans, which identify the source of emissions that they're targeting, the action that they will take, and when they aim to complete that action by. So this first example, we'll plan to reduce commute-related emissions by being remote first, work from home friendly as a business. And the second action focused on packaging is around using less carbon intensive plastic in their dog food bag to make it more recyclable. So again, each of these kind of smaller bite-sized reduction actions, changes that they're making in their operations to enable them to over time meet longer term reduction goals. Next slide is for a case study on a larger business, a medium hair care brand. They completed a full refined inventory in the B, set reduction plans, and have also set science-aligned targets. So they're tracking towards these longer term commitments and kind of more ambitious goals. So their emissions total and scope 1, 2, and 3 breakdown looks different. It's a lot bigger. You can see they're a larger business. Their reduction action plans, though, still look pretty similar to what we saw for the small business who completed an estimate in the B, but they are, targeting different sources of emissions here. And then their ambitious kind of longer term science-aligned target is committing to reduce scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions 50% by 2030. So in line with those climate goals or climate science. Awesome. So from here, I'm going to pass it back to Julia, and she has a couple other examples to show as well.
Awesome.
Yeah, back over to you, Julia.
Thank you. So we similarly wanted to share a few case studies from our side, working with customers on their GHG accounting process and then helping them identify which reduction actions will be most impactful for them to take. So I'll start with this first case study here. So this was completed for a mid-sized direct-to-consumer brand. They essentially came to us because they wanted to measure and understand the environmental impact of both their domestic and international activities, not only to inform their carbon reduction strategies, but also because they knew that they wanted to expand their product offerings and enter new markets. And they wanted to understand how could they actually keep their footprint minimized while still expanding the business, which is a very common question that we get. So what we did is we calculated their total emissions. This was for their 2021 calendar year, and we found that almost 98% of their footprint fell into scope 3, which is not entirely unexpected for a consumer goods brand. And when we dug into the footprint further, we identified their hotspots as being purchased goods and services, customer use, and transportation and distribution. These three together comprise about 92% of their scope 3 footprint. And so what we did then to help inform their net zero strategy is we identified particular actions tied to these hotspots that could actually result in reduced emissions. So with regard to transportation, with regard to purchase goods and services and transportation as well, they had a lot of suppliers that were based internationally, and they were air freighting a lot of their raw materials to their manufacturing facilities within the US. So we suggested that they increase the use of their domestic suppliers in order to minimize the impact of this air freight. Their customer use hotspot, this was an interesting one, and it was due to their recommendations that they provide customers in how they should be washing and drying their products, essentially saying that their product can be washed infinite amounts of times. The issue is that this does have an emissions impact associated with it. And so one action that we recommended is that they might need to educate and influence customer behavior in a different way to try and reduce the lifetime impact of this use phase. And then lastly, for purchase goods and services, we suggested that they really investigate further their material suppliers and their particular energy usage, and also try to incorporate renewable materials into their product design, as they were using some carbon intensive materials like polyester. So this is one example. And another one that we did more recently, and we actually did use the V tool for this one. This was actually focused on scope 1 and 2 emissions. And our customer came to us because they had an investor that was requiring several of their portfolio companies to calculate emissions. And they need to submit a report by a deadline. And so knowing that this company was brand new to the space, also had a looming deadline, they really, I think, appreciated the use of the V tool because it was very simple and easy to understand for them, and very doable. And so we calculated their scope 1 and 2 emissions, and they had 9 renewable energy production facilities within the US. And so despite only calculating scope 1 and 2 emissions, we were still able to identify a few key findings and share some recommendations with them for next steps. So one recommendation was that we found one of the 9 facilities actually significantly contributed to their emissions, much more so than other facilities. And when we share this finding in our final presentation, they did suggest there could be a few reasons that were causing this, perhaps operational inefficiencies, as it was their very first facility before they really knew how to set it up for success, and a few other reasons that might be the root cause. So that was one key recommendation. We also suggested, given certain data gaps they had for this very first time, that they develop a standardized process to collect their scope 1 and 2 emissions data going forward. For example, collecting annual odometer readings from their company fleet of vehicles. And then last but not least, we did recommend that they do develop an action plan to try to include and calculate material scope 3 categories for the following year, as they were likely to be material for them. So these are just a few case studies, and I think in both cases, the executive team that we presented to really appreciated the data-driven insights. And the other thing that really, I think, helps get buy-in is showing them that if they do have operational inefficiencies that are causing higher emissions in a certain facility, that also means that their electricity bill is significantly higher. And so I think there's some win-wins that could be had with emissions reductions, and also perhaps reducing the bottom line as well, rather the costs as well. And so we wanted to talk through what are some common pain points that professionals face, consultants face within organizations to try and progress on corporate climate action. So I think the 3 key buckets that we tend to hear about are organizational barriers, resource constraints, and a knowledge and skill gap. So starting with organizational barriers. So sometimes it is difficult to get buy-in from management. In larger firms in particular, there tends to be fragmented decision-making processes, or perhaps bureaucratic systems in place that make getting sustainability initiatives off the ground a challenge. Oftentimes, if a company has not previously had any sort of sustainability strategy in place, then there might be some internal resistance to change from colleagues or other stakeholders. In particular, if there are investors or customers that may not be as supportive of climate change and initiatives to reduce climate change, then they might face resistance to enacting sustainability initiatives and publicly communicating on them. Sometimes professionals within organizations feel that they are not in a position to influence decision-making, and therefore are hesitant to bring this up with their management. And it is very often the case that, especially in a difficult economic cycle, that companies are prioritizing short-term profits and just making sure that they maintain their revenue over thinking about long-term sustainability. Then when it comes to knowledge and skill gap, what we often hear about is that sometimes it is difficult to identify climate initiatives that both align with climate goals and also could have financial benefits. Without knowing what the latest tools and software are, some companies are unsure of how to actually get started and are often intimidated by the process. We've also ourselves experienced challenges to build and sell a compelling business case to do this work. And there is often a lack of clarity on what kind of resources and talent a company actually needs to move forward on climate initiatives. Lastly, when it comes to resource constraints, I think we've all been here. Companies always have limited financial resources, in particular for implementing special projects, which may involve purchasing expensive software or hiring new staff. Oftentimes there are competing priorities and limitations in company staff bandwidth to take on additional climate projects. We often hear about how these initiatives do tend to be done on the side of your desk. And historically, it has been difficult to measure and report an impact. One, it can be a complex exercise if you've never done it before. And also with reporting on GHG emissions, there does tend to be the risk for backlash or for intense or increased scrutiny. So how do we actually address these? So we came up with some actionable strategies that can be taken by both sustainability professionals, but also those that are not in sustainability roles, and what you can actually get done in a short period of time. So let's say you are a sustainability professional, either working on a sustainability team or tangential, or perhaps a sustainability consultant. So I think to push past the inertia of getting started, definitely utilize a GHG calculation tool, and it does not need to be a super intense and expensive annual subscription to a GHG accounting tool. Tools like the B, which we use at OnePointFive, and we actually use it in our instruction as well, are really great because they still allow you to pinpoint your biggest emission sources to help focus improvement efforts. You're able to do this in a fairly short period of time, and it really gets you going on identifying those reduction action steps, as Sarah mentioned, those short-term actions that can be taken that really help feed into that long-term sustainability plan. We recommend that sustainability professionals advocate for action. You can craft a proposal to reduce emissions and then pitch this to decision makers within the organization, making sure that you are highlighting those short-term gains and then what the longer-term goals are as well, and if there are any investments that are needed along the way. What we find very useful is to create financial models that are able to show both cost savings and returns on investment when you are investing in sustainability, and how that compares with projected business growth as well. And of course, we have seen it work where if you have a business case, it also helps to get buy-in from others within the organization before you bring it to the top decision maker. So drafting an advocacy letter, gathering signatures can really go a long way. And with that, building internal support. So if one does not exist yet, join or start an employee resource group. And if one doesn't exist, try and seek a leadership role to really make sure that you're involved in the sustainability initiatives within the organization. Host educational events to help raise awareness and really make sure that employees understand what GHG accounting is, what it includes, and why the company might need to undertake it. And of course, build relationships with colleagues and decision makers to make sure that you're able to garner support for initiatives. And then not on the flip side, but also for non-sustainability professionals, even without a background in the space, you can still make a huge impact. So I think one thing we definitely recommend is try and establish foundational education around sustainability. It does not mean you need to go back and get your master's degree in sustainability, but there's already so many resources out there. You can research current sustainability methods, take a look at what the company already has in place to identify areas for action, whether that be an existing sustainability report, any public statements, any other ESG efforts, participation in trade associations, and also seeing what peers in the industry are doing so that you can benchmark. You're able to build a case for climate action. Again, you can estimate your company's footprint for free using the B Tools estimation feature, and that will give you a sense of how significant it might be, where the hotspots might be, and then it will point out where you might to investigate further. If there are certain particular significant sources, you can then use company resources to try and collect granular data for those specific sources. And then, of course, propose reduction actions alongside those. And what we really recommend to build a compelling business case is to highlight co-benefits, whether those be cost savings, brand reputation, improved energy efficiency, employee retention, and loyalty. There are many co-benefits that go along with climate action that are very real and should be highlighted in the business case. And then, similar to the last slide, connect with colleagues who share your sustainability priorities and goals, and really building a community around sustainability within an organization really gives it more power and sway and can help get that buy-in from corporate leaders. So that is it for our main content. I will pause again here. If we do have any questions that have come in, I will do a quick check. And of course, if you have any questions in the chat, feel free to drop those in. And if not, I will progress to our next steps. So, Sarah, would you like to touch on the survey?
Yes, this is a quick CTA from Change Climate Project, and really an opportunity for anyone on this call to help shape the future of corporate climate accountability. If you have 10 minutes, we'd appreciate you taking the opportunity and sharing your feedback on our public draft of our 2025 certification standard. It's currently available on our website, and Denise already kindly shared the link, thechangeclimate.org/2025. This is really an evolution of our certification standard and will allow companies to be able to fund the highest impact reduction initiatives, including projects to reduce emissions within their own value chain. We are creating updates to and releasing updated claims and a new label this summer, and will eventually retire the climate neutral certified label. So this is really an stakeholder input period to complete this process. Yeah, so we'd appreciate your input by June 14th. That's this Friday. And if you do share your survey, you'll be entered to win one of 3 $100 gift cards to REI, Allbirds, or Vuori. So a little incentive there. But thank you for your input in advance. And I think that's all for this slide.
Thanks so much, Sarah. And super exciting on the evolution of the standard. Can't wait to see what it looks like next. And from our standpoint, a lot of the content in what we teach is from our Sustainability Academy. And our next cohort begins very shortly, in less than 1 month, on July 8th. And so we actually do have a special code just for the attendees of the webinar. So for those of you on the call who may be interested in learning more about not only GHG accounting, but other aspects of corporate sustainability as well, if you mention the code E10 in the application referral section, then you will get 10% off tuition. So make sure to apply today if this content interests you and you want to learn more. So with that in mind, thanks everyone for joining today. Hope this was useful, and seeing the V tool is always super interesting, and especially hearing about how real brands out there are already progressing on their goals is fantastic. So thanks again everyone for joining, and have a great rest of your day.